Hey, what's up, guys? Combat Critique here. Let's take a look at this upcoming heavyweight interim championship fight between Sergei Pavlovich and Tom Aspinall. So let's get started. If we take a look at the records of these two guys, starting with Pavlovich, so Pavlovich has 19 fights in total, and he has won 18 of his 19 fights, lost just once. If we talk about his 18 wins, he has 15 via knockout and just 3 via decision. So this man is a knockout guy. And if we talk about his one loss, that came in his UFC debut, and that was a TKO loss. Now let's take a look at Tom Aspinall's record. So Aspinall has 16 fights, and he has won 13 of his 16 fights, lost just 3. If we talk about his 13 wins, he has 10 wins via knockout, 3 via submission, and this man is also a finishing machine just like Pavlovich. However, Pavlovich does not have a submission win, whereas Tom Aspinall has got submissions in the UFC. If we talk about his 3 losses, he has been knocked out once, and this was an injury loss which he suffered in his fight against Curtis Blades. And before that, he also has a submission loss and a DQ loss on his record. Now, let's talk about the physical and career statistics of both these guys. Starting with the height, so height is 6'3 for Pavlovich and it is 6'5 for Tom Aspinall. So Tom Aspinall is a big guy. Both of these guys are big, but Tom Aspinall has a 2-inch height advantage. Weight, so the weight of Pavlovich is around 257 pounds, whereas for Tom it is 256. So both these guys are pretty even. I don't think anybody will have an advantage in the weight department. If we talk about the reach, it is 84 inches for Pavlovich. So Pavlovich has an insane reach for his height, which is 6'3. It's almost as remarkable as John Jones. John Jones is a bit taller, but he has a half-inch reach advantage over Pavlovich. And if we talk about the reach of Tom Aspinall, it is 78 inches. So Tom Aspinall, despite being the taller guy, will have a reach disadvantage of 6 inches, which is pretty substantial. If we talk about the stance, Pavlovich is a southpaw fighter and Tom Aspinall is an orthodox stance fighter. Comparing the age, I don't think age will be a factor in this fight. Both these guys are similar aged and they are in their primes right now. Now let's talk about the career statistics, starting with the striking numbers. First up, we have the strikes landed per minute. So this signifies the number of significant strikes that you land on your opponents per minute on average. This is 8.72 for Pavlovich, which is really high, and it is 7.65 for Aspinall, which is also high but not as high as Pavlovich. So here the advantage goes to Pavlovich. He is landing quite a bit more number of significant strikes on his opponents per minute. Next up, we have the striking accuracy, which is 49% for Pavlovich, and it is 66% for Tom Aspinall. So Tom Aspinall will have an advantage here. He is more accurate with his strikes. Next up, we have the strikes absorbed per minute. Now, this is the opposite of strikes landed per minute, and this signifies the number of strikes that you absorb from your opponents per minute on average. This is 4.33 for Pavlovich, and it is just 2.9 for Tom Aspinall. So in this case, the guy with the lower number has an advantage because he is getting hit lesser. So here the advantage again goes to Tom Aspinall. He gets hit lesser than Pavlovich in his fights. Next up, we have the striking defense, which is 57% for Pavlovich and it is 65% for Tom Aspinall. So again, Tom Aspinall has an advantage here. He has the better striking defense. Now let's talk about the wrestling, grappling and BJJ statistics. Starting with the takedown average, it is just 0 for Pavlovich. Pavlovich has never taken anybody down in the UFC so far, whereas it is 3.7 for Tom Aspinall, which is really good for a heavyweight, so he will have a clear advantage in the wrestling department. Takedown accuracy is 0% for Pavlovich because he has not taken anybody down in the UFC, whereas it is 100% for Tom Aspinall. I think Tom Aspinall has gotten every takedown that he has shot for, and that is why his takedown accuracy is 100%. Does it mean that he is a phenomenal wrestler? I don't think so. I think this has more to do with the fact that the number of takedowns he has shot in the UFC are so few, and he has managed to get every one of them. But he's not a very high caliber wrestler that he'll have a takedown accuracy of 100%. And if we look at the takedown defense, it is also 100%. So it's likely that nobody really shot a takedown on Tom Aspinall, and the one guy that did attempt a takedown got stuffed. If we talk about the takedown defense of Sergei Pavlovich, it is 75%, which is not bad. And again, the advantage here goes to Tom Aspinall. He is having 100% takedown defense. I don't think Pavlovich will try to take down Tom Aspinall, whereas Tom Aspinall, I think, will most likely shoot on Sergei Pavlovich. If we talk about the submission average, it is just 0 for Pavlovich. Pavlovich has never attempted a submission in the UFC so far, and it is 1.9 for Tom Aspinall. So Tom Aspinall is the better submission expert in this fighter, and we see it in his record as well. He has 3 wins via sub, whereas Pavlovich has none. Now let us take a look at the significant strikes by position for these two guys, starting with Pavlovich. 67% of all the strikes that Pavlovich throws are from the standing position, 12% from the clinch, and 21% on the ground. If we compare this with Tom Aspinall, 56% of all his strikes are from the standing position, 14% in the clinch, and 30% on the ground. I think this is pretty clear from the previous stats that Tom Aspinall is a better wrestler. He is the better submission guy, and therefore he likes to take the fight to the ground, whereas Sergei Pavlovich likes to keep it standing and he likes to knock out his opponents. Now let's take a look at the significant strikes by target for both these guys. Starting with Pavlovich, 93% of all his strikes are to the head, just 6% to the body, and 1% or hardly anything to the leg. So Pavlovich is almost head hunting from the standing position. He is a knockout guy. If you have seen his fights, you know all these stats are pretty much clear from watching his fights. Whereas if we talk about Tom Aspinall, 68% of all his strikes are to the head, 15% to the body, and 18% to the leg. So Tom Aspinall uses a lot more variety. He mixes leg kicks in his game. He is landing shots to the body. He is a more diversified striker, I'll say, whereas Sergei Pavlovich is only going for the head. He is only going for the knockout. Now let's take a look at some of the previous fights of these two guys, starting with Pavlovich. So Pavlovich in his last fight beat Curtis Blades, and this happened in the very first round. This fight happened in April of this year, so he is taking some time off and now coming back to fight once again for this interim heavyweight championship title fight. Keep in mind that Pavlovich was supposed to be the backup for Jones and Stipe, so he has been going through a full training camp, whereas Tom Aspinall is the guy who took this fight on short notice. I'll talk about what happens when you take a fight on short notice. What are your stats in the next slide. For this slide, just look at how many strikes Sergei Pavlovich landed compared to just 14 from Curtis Blades, and he was also able to land a knockdown and finish Curtis in the very first round. If we talk about the fight before that, he did something similar to Tai Tuivasa, where he outlanded Tai Tuivasa by 23 and 2, and he was also able to finish Tai Tuivasa in the very first round. Before that, he also finished Derek Lewis in the very first round, again outstriking him and finishing the fight in the very first round. He finished Shamil Abdurakhimov again in the very first round and outstruck him on the feet. He beat Maurice Green also by first round KO TKO punches and again outstruck him on the feet. He beat Marcelo Gome, and this was also a KO TKO in the very first round. So Pavlovich is riding a 6-fight win streak right now. All 6 of those wins have been by a KO in the very first round. He is a very heavy-handed fighter. People call him the Russian Ngannou for a reason. And if we talk about the fight before that, this was his UFC debut and this is his only loss as a pro. In this fight, Alistair Overeem took him down and outlanded him on the ground to win the fight via KO TKO in the very first round. I think this is what Tom Aspinall will be looking to do. He will be looking to replicate what Alistair Overeem did to Pavlovich back in 2018. Now let's take a look at some of the previous few fights of Tom Aspinall. So Aspinall in his last fight beat Marcin Tybura in the very first round, and this fight happened in July of this year. So he is not taking a lot of time off and now coming back to fight Pavlovich once again on short notice. In this fight, Aspinall took down Taibura and outstruck him and finally got the TKO finish. Before this fight was the KO TKO loss that we saw on his record where he lost to Curtis Blade. However, he was injured in this fight and this is the reason he lost this fight. Before this, he beat Alexander Volkov, who is a good wrestler in the heavyweight division. He has good takedown defense, even comparable to that of Sergei Pavlovich. But Tom Aspinall was able to land two takedowns on Alexander Volkov and he was able to get an armbar. He outstruck him on the feet. This fight happened in March of last year, and this fight gives me hope that if he can take down Alexander Volkov, then Pavlovich is a shorter guy than Volkov, and both these guys had good takedown defense, but still Tom Aspinall was able to take down Volkov twice in their fight and finish the fight in the very first round. Before this fight, he beat Sergei Spivak, and in this fight, he was able to land a knockdown in the very first round and win the fight. Before this, he beat Andrei Arlovsky. In this fight, he landed one takedown on Andrei Arlovsky and he was able to finish the fight in the second round via rear naked choke. Before this, he beat Alan Badot and in this fight also he landed one takedown. So Tom Aspinall uses wrestling a lot more in his game compared to Pavlovich. And before that was the fight with Jake Collier where Tom Aspinall knocked him down in the very first round to win the fight. So both these guys are really exciting fighters. What makes them different is Sergei Pavlovich is almost always headhunting and he is looking for the knockout, whereas Tom Aspinall mixes in his wrestling and his grappling, and he has submission wins in the UFC. He is more crafty in terms of his shot selection. He is using leg kicks. He is going to the body, and this is the start that I was talking about. So Sergey Pavlovich has a full training camp behind him because he was the backup for Stipe Miocic versus John Jones fight. And if we talk about Tom Aspinall really has a little over 2 weeks to prepare for this fight. If we talk about the stats for late replacement win, the percentage of people who were late replacement and who won were just 37%, whereas it is 63% for the times when the guy who is the late replacement he loses the fight. We have just seen this in the previous UFC 294, where the main and co-main event guys who were late replacement they both lost their fights. Volkanovski was finished in the very first round by a head kick, and Chimaev beat Usman via unanimous decision. Both these guys took the fight on short notice and they lost. And this is my only concern with picking Tom Aspinall. Otherwise, we have seen Tom Aspinall is a better wrestler. He is the better grappler. He has a 2-inch height advantage and he also has the better striking defense. So all of these combined should make one thing that Tom Aspinall will win this fight. However, preparation matters here, and Pavlovich is having a 6 to 8 week, maybe a 10 week training camp behind him, whereas Tom Aspinall is really taking this fight on 2 weeks, a little over 2 weeks notice. So this will definitely even the odds a little bit. However, if I have to pick a winner, I think I'll still go with Tom Aspinall. I think if he took this fight on short notice, then he is probably seeing something that we are not. And keep this in mind that both these guys were scheduled to fight together, to fight each other back in 2021, and that fight was pulled off because Pavlovich had visa issues. So it's not like Tom Aspinall is preparing for Pavlovich for the very first time or Pavlovich is preparing for Tom Aspinall for the very first time. This is the second time these two guys are scheduled to fight. So the previous preparation for Pavlovich, I think, comes in handy for Tom Aspinall, considering that Pavlovich has not really changed his game a lot. He is still a striker. He is still looking for the knockout that he was back in 2021 when they were originally supposed to fight. So for these reasons, I'm picking Aspinall to win this fight. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below. I'll see you guys in the next video.